The boy was 18 years old, and he was about to drive a car full of moonshine down a mountain in the dark with the headlights off. And if he wrecked, or got caught, his blind grandmother would lose the only home she had left in this world. It was October of 1958, in Cocke County, Tennessee, deep in the Smoky Mountains, on a moonless night so black you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. A souped-up 1950 Ford sat idling at the top of a mountain road, its engine tuned to a low, hungry growl, its trunk and back seat riding heavy with jars of white liquor. Behind the wheel sat Eli Boone, 18 years old, an orphan, the fastest natural driver in 3 counties, his hands steady on the wheel and pure terror behind his eyes. He killed the lights, and he started down the mountain in the dark. But here is what the men who owned that car did not know, and what you need to know to understand this whole story. Eli Boone was not a criminal. He was a boy caught in a trap, a rigged debt his dead father had left behind, a debt engineered so that it could never, ever be paid, held like a knife over the throat of a blind old woman who had never done a wrong thing in all her long life. And days from now, a tall stranger is going to come up that same mountain road, looking for nothing more than gas for his car and a hot meal for his belly. He's going to stop at a little filling station down on the highway, and he's going to see the fear in a boy's face, and he is not going to be able to make himself drive on. In the weeks ahead, that stranger will do 3 things this mountain will never forget. He'll pay off a debt that was never meant to be paid. He'll ride shotgun on the fastest and most dangerous run of Eli Boone's young life. And he'll put the most powerful, most patient, most untouchable man in all of Cocke County into a pair of federal handcuffs. Nobody up on that mountain recognizes him yet. By the end of this story, you'll understand that the cruelest chain in all the world is the one forged out of your own love for somebody, and how it sometimes takes a stranger from the outside, a man who owes you nothing at all, to break it. Here is the story. The Boones had been mountain people for just about as long as anyone in Cocke County could remember. They came into those hills before the Civil War, and they had stayed through everything the mountains ever threw at them. The hard winters, the hungry springs, the timber companies that came and stripped the ridges bare, the revenue men who came looking for stills. By the autumn of 1958, there wasn't a great deal left of the Boone family. A little frame house and a few steep acres up a hollow off Wolf Creek, a hand-dug well, a garden patch, a lean-to for a milk cow that had long since died. That, and 2 people. That was all that was left. 2 people and a debt. Eli's father was a man named Cade Boone, and Cade had been, like a great many hard-working men in that country in those years, a maker of moonshine whiskey. It was not a thing the mountain judged a man for. Up in the hollows of Cocke County, making liquor was often the plain difference between a family eating that winter and a family not eating, and it had been that way for the better part of 100 years. Cade Boone made good, clean whiskey, and he drove a car fast and fearless, and both of those things brought him to the attention of the operation that controlled the whole trade in that end of the county, an operation run by a smiling, patient man named Hollis Trask. In the spring of 1956, Cade Boone died on a run. His car went off a switchback on the old Newport Road in the black dark and rolled the better part of 200 feet straight down the side of the mountain. He was 39 years old when he died. He left behind a boy of 16 and his own mother, Eli's grandmother, and a debt to Hollis Trask that Cade had been carrying at the time the mountain took him. The grandmother's name was Ada Boone. She was 71 years old that autumn, and she had gone blind from cataracts some 3 years before, and Eli was every single thing that she had left in this world. She had raised Cade in that little house, and she had buried her own husband from it, and then she had buried her son Cade from it too, and those few steep acres up the hollow were the whole sum of everything she owned on this earth. She could not see any more, but she knew every board of that old house by the touch of her hand, and every step of the worn path down to the well, and she used to tell Eli, in her soft and unhurried mountain voice, "Now don't you go frettin' so, child. Somebody good always comes. They always do come, if you can just find it in you to hold on till they get here." Eli loved that old woman more than he loved his own life, and that love, exactly that, was the chain that held him. Because here is the thing that Hollis Trask did, and it will tell you what manner of man he was. When Cade Boone died on that mountain, Trask took the debt that Cade had owed him, for the car, for the protection, for the right to run liquor in that territory, and he transferred it, whole and entire, onto the narrow shoulders of a 16-year-old boy. And then, patient as a spider, he made certain that it grew. There was interest laid on it. There were fees. There was the rental price of every car Eli was made to drive, and the price of every single load he carried, all of it stacked on top, month after month after month. Eli would make a run, risk his neck on a black mountain road at 60 miles an hour, and the debt would be bigger the next morning than it had been the night before he drove. It was built that way, on purpose, by design. It was built so that it could never, ever be paid off. That was the trap, and it was a beautiful and evil piece of work, and you have to understand the shape of it to understand the story. Eli Boone was the finest natural driver anybody in that country had ever laid eyes on, a boy who could take a heavily loaded car down a pitch-black mountain road at frightful speed, with the headlights switched clean off, and never so much as scrape a fender against the rock. A driver like that boy was worth far more to Hollis Trask than any pile of money could ever be. So Trask made good and sure that the money never came. He kept the boy running, year upon year, forever working off a debt that by its very design could not be worked off, because a driver held in bondage to him was worth a great deal more than a driver paid off and gone free. And if Eli should try to quit, if he got himself caught or wrecked the car or simply refused one night to drive, then Hollis Trask would call in that debt, all of it, every rigged dollar, at once, and take Ada Boone's home right out from under her, and put a blind, gentle, 71-year-old woman out onto the road to fend for herself. He said as much, in that soft, pleasant voice of his, more than once. On the dashboard of every car that Trask handed him to drive, Eli kept one single thing that was truly his own. It was his father's pocket watch, a plain, worn, silver watch on a short chain, the one and only thing of Cade Boone's that Eli had left in all the world. He would set it up there on the dash before every run, and he would listen to it ticking away steady underneath the growl of the engine, and somehow, some way, the sound of it steadied his own heart. It was the only piece of his father that he had, and it was the only thing in that whole car that did not belong, body and soul, to Hollis Trask. And here is the very worst part of it, the part that tells you exactly the kind of man Trask was. Hollis Trask never once, in all of it, raised his voice. He was not a hot-tempered thug who ruled by his fists. He was a patient, pleasant, church-going, smiling businessman who had figured out, somewhere along the way, that a debt makes a far better cage than any gun ever could, and that a good man's love for his own family is the strongest and most reliable rope on all the earth. He was not cruel out of anger. He was cruel out of cold arithmetic. And that, friends, is the most dangerous kind of cruel there is in this world. Eli tried to get himself out. That very autumn, he worked up the nerve, and he tried. He had been saving, a few dollars at a time, squirreled away in an old coffee can hidden under a floorboard. Money he earned honest, pumping gas during the daylight hours at the little filling station down on the highway. Because you have to understand, Eli did not want the driving. He never had wanted it, not for a single day. What Eli Boone wanted, more than anything else in all the world, was simply the daylight, an honest job, a steady wage down at the sawmill up the river. A plain, ordinary life where he did not have to lie awake in the dark, listening for the sound of the revenue men's cars, and where his grandmother did not have to sit up each and every night, wondering whether her boy was ever going to come home to her alive. He wanted to be an ordinary boy, working in the sun, like other boys. So he took his coffee can money, every dollar of it, and he went to Hollis Trask, and he laid it out on the table between them, and he asked, respectful as he knew how, to make a payment on the debt and start clearing it and be done. Trask smiled at him. That was the thing that Eli would remember for the rest of his life. Trask smiled at him, warm and gentle as any preacher, and he reached over and opened up his ledger, the very book where the debt was written down in his own neat hand, and he turned it around on the table so that the boy could see it plain, and he walked Eli through the numbers, kind and slow and patient, the way a man might explain something to a small and slow-witted child. And the numbers did not go down. They went up. Every column, every line, every month, the debt climbed higher than the month before. Eli's whole coffee can full of hard-earned money did not so much as cover that 1 month's fees. Now Eli, Trask said gently, closing the ledger back up with a soft little sound, I know how it must look to you, son. I know it looks steep, but a debt is a debt, boy. Your daddy gave me his word on it, and you are your daddy's own blood, and blood answers for blood up here. You know that as well as I do. We'll get there in time. You just keep on driving for me, good as you drive, and we will surely get there." And then, still smiling, still soft and pleasant as Sunday, he said the thing that had been the entire purpose of the whole conversation. "And how is your grandmother getting along these days? Miss Ada? Blind as she is, and way up that lonesome hollow all by her own self while you're out on the roads working. Why, it'd be an awful, awful shame if anything was to come unsettled up there. A woman of her years, and no place in this world to go." He let those words just sit there in the air between them a while. "But that won't happen, Eli. Long as you keep on driving for me, that won't ever have to happen." He named her. Ada. He named the home right out loud. He said the word shame in that soft, smiling Sunday voice of his, and two of his men stood leaning against the wall and watched it all happen. And in that moment, Eli Boone understood, completely and forever, that he was never once getting out. Not by paying. There was no paying. The love that he carried for his grandmother was the chain around his neck, and Hollis Trask held the other end of it in his soft hand, and Trask was never, ever going to let it go. And then Trask told him about the big run. It was to be the biggest load of the entire year, Trask explained. A huge run, crossing over the county line and the state line both, all the way down to buyers out of Carolina, worth more money than young Eli had ever seen gathered in one place in his life. It would be dangerous, Trask allowed. The federal revenue men had been cracking down hard all that fall, and there were sure to be agents watching the roads. But if Eli made it, if he got that big load through clean and delivered, well then, Trask said, smiling wider than ever, then maybe, son, you and me will just sit down together and have us a talk about that old debt of yours. Maybe we'll go on and call the whole thing square. Eli knew, standing right there, that it was a lie. He knew it down in his very bones. And so do you, reading this. But he said yes, because the only other answer was a blind old woman put out on the road, and there is not a man alive on this earth, of any age at all, who could have said no with that on the table in front of him. He walked out of Trask's place that day with nothing left inside of him, not even hope. He drove back down the mountain to the filling station in the failing evening light, sick clear down to his stomach, and he was standing out at the pumps with his father's silver watch hanging heavy in his pocket, when a long, dusty automobile came rolling in off the highway and eased to a stop, and a tall man leaned one elbow out the open window and asked, friendly, where a fellow might get himself some gasoline and a hot supper in this part of the country. Before we go on with it, because we're coming up now on the heart of the whole thing, do me one small favor. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your state down there in the comments so I can see just exactly how far this story is going to travel across this country of ours. And if you have ever in your life been trapped by your own love for somebody, held fast in a place you hated, doing things you never once wanted to do, because someone you loved with your whole heart needed you to, then type 2 words for me down below. Ride along, just so I know that you're here with us for this one, because I promise you, it is about to get good. Now, let's get back to that filling station and the tall stranger who just pulled in off the highway. He was a big man. That was the very first thing that Eli noticed about him, standing there filling the tank of that long, dusty automobile, broad through the shoulders and tall, so tall that he had to duck his head down a little just to see out through the windshield and up at the boy. He had an easy, unhurried way about him, the way of a man who had been to a great many places in his life and was in no particular rush at all to get on to the next one. He paid for his gasoline and he asked after supper, and old Wade Pruitt, who owned the little station, and who had a soft spot a mile wide for the Boone boy that the whole town knew to be in bad trouble, sent the stranger on up the road to the cafe and told him, quiet, that the boy pumping his gas out there was the finest young man in the whole county, and just about the unluckiest one too. The stranger looked at Eli a good long while. He did not miss much, that man. You could see it in his eyes. He saw the fear that the boy wore on him like a heavy winter coat in the middle of October. He saw the silver pocket watch that Eli kept reaching down to touch in his trouser pocket, the way a man will touch a thing that matters more to him than he can say. And when the stranger came back down the road from his supper, he did not leave. He stayed. And he got to talking, easy and slow, and little by little, some of it drawn gentle out of the boy himself, and a good deal more of it out of Wade Pruitt, who was just plain sick to the depths of his soul over what Hollis Trask had done to that fatherless child. The tall stranger drew the whole sorry story out into the light. The rigged debt that could not be paid, the blind grandmother up the lonesome hollow, the runs that never once ended, no matter how many the boy made, the ledger that only ever grew, month upon month.
"Can't the sheriff of this county do something about all this?" the stranger asked, quiet. Old Wade Pruitt just laughed at that, a short, bitter little sound with no humor in it anywhere. "The sheriff?" he said. "Why, mister, the sheriff of this county eats right out of Hollis Trask's own hand, and has done for years. Trask bought and paid for that man a long time ago. There is no help to be had down at that courthouse. There is no help to be had anywhere in this county at all. And that, mister, is exactly what makes it all so bad. Every living soul around here knows precisely what's being done to that boy, and not one of us can do a blessed thing about it." And that, right there, was the moment the tall stranger went quiet, and something shifted behind his eyes, because he had just now seen the one thing that not a single soul in all of Cocke County had managed to see. He had spent enough long years around enough hard and lawless country to understand a thing that the mountain folks, hemmed in by their own fear, could not. Moonshine liquor, hauled across a state line, in a rigged operation this large, why, that was no county matter at all. It was far too big a thing for a bought county sheriff to protect, because it was not the sheriff's to protect in the first place. It was federal. It was untaxed liquor crossing a state line, and that meant the United States Revenue men, the alcohol tax unit, and those men did not answer to Hollis Trask, and could not be bought by all his money, and had, Wade Pruitt allowed, been trying to crack Trask's operation wide open for years, and had never once been able to get themselves a man on the inside, or a date and a route to move on. Now, the stranger could have driven on. You need to sit with that, because it's the hinge the whole thing turns on. He had paid for his gasoline. It was not his county. It was not his boy. It was not his fight. None of it, in any way at all. He could have finished his coffee and pointed that long, dusty automobile back down the highway and never once thought about Cocke County, Tennessee, again for the rest of his natural life. But he would say later, in the letter, that a man who knows all of that and drives on anyway is nothing in this world but a coward with a car. So he did not drive on. He stayed, and over the next 10 days, quiet and patient, the way you build any trap that is worth the building, he did 3 things. The first thing he did was go to the law, not the bought sheriff, the real law. He drove clear to the city, and he walked straight into the Federal Revenue Office, and he sat himself down across the desk from an alcohol tax unit agent by the name of Harmon, and he told that man, plain, that he could hand him Hollis Trask, the whole operation, the interstate buyers, the kingpin behind it, the bought sheriff, every last piece of it, on a date certain, with an inside man's own knowledge of the route and the meat. Agent Harmon had been chasing Hollis Trask, fruitless, for 6 long years. He very nearly came straight up out of his chair. The second thing the stranger did was quieter, and it was the thing that mattered the very most of all. He made certain that no matter what happened out on that mountain, come what may, the blind old woman would be safe. He funded the payoff of Eli Boone's entire debt, every last rigged and rotten dollar of it, and had it paid, in full, quiet and discreet, so that Hollis Trask no longer held one single solitary thing over that family's heads. Some of the money came arranged quiet through the federal case. Some of it, the stranger simply covered himself out of his own pocket, and some of it came from a couple of wealthy friends out west who owed the man old favors and knew far better than to ask him what it was all for. But the point of it was this, and it is the whole tender heart of the man. Before the last run ever happened, before a single wheel turned, the chain was already cut. Eli Boone's home was already safe and secure. Hollis Trask just did not know yet that he had already lost. And the third thing the stranger did was to get himself close to Eli. He did not tell the boy everything. You do not hand a frightened 18-year-old the whole of the plan and then ask him to go and act natural in front of a man like Hollis Trask. But he told him enough to carry him. He found Eli one evening out at the station, in the blue dusk, and he laid one big hand on the boy's thin shoulder, and he said, low and steady, "Son, you are not alone in this thing anymore. I don't want you to ask me how, and I surely don't want you to change one single thing that you do. But this run that's coming up, this one is the last one,
the very last one you will ever make. Whatever happens out there on that mountain, things are going to happen that Hollis Trask is not expecting to happen. You just drive like you always drive, the best there ever was, and you keep your grandmother's watch right up there on that dash where it belongs, and you trust me. Can you do that one thing for me, son?"
Eli looked up at him, a long, long moment in the falling dark, and for the first time in 2 solid years, the boy felt something rise up in his chest that he had very nearly forgotten the name of altogether. It was hope. The night of the big run would be the night that the net finally closed. Let me stop us right here for just a moment, because we are coming now to the hardest part of the whole story, and I want you thinking on it with me. Have you ever been trapped by love, held fast in a place you truly hated, doing things you never in your life wanted to do, simply because someone that you loved with all your heart needed you to keep on doing them? Have you ever felt so entirely alone inside of a thing that you finally just stopped believing that any help was ever going to come for you at all? Stopped even watching the road for it, the way Ada told that boy to keep watching? And have you ever once stopped and wondered just how many good and decent people are being held, right now, tonight, out there in the dark, by nothing in this world stronger than their own good hearts? Because that, friends, is the truth sitting right at the very center of this whole story. The cruelest chain there is was never made of iron. It is made of love. And sometimes the only thing on God's earth that can break a chain like that is a stranger, somebody who comes in from the outside, who owes you nothing at all, and who stops for you anyway. The night of the last run was moonless, same as the very first night you saw at the top of this story. Eli backed the loaded 1950 Ford out of Hollis Trask's barn, the trunk and the whole back seat of it riding low and heavy with jars, and he reached over and set his father's silver pocket watch up on the dashboard, where it always went. But this time, this one time, the boy was not alone in that car. This time, the tall stranger climbed up into the passenger seat beside him and pulled the door shut. He had talked his way in. He'd walked right up to Hollis Trask a few days before and presented himself, calm as you please, as a buyer's man, come down from up the line to ride along with the load and vouch for it to the Carolina people, on the good sense that a run this big and this valuable really oughtn't to go all that way unwatched. And Trask, who trusted money above every other thing in this world, and who saw standing in front of him a big, calm, sure man who talked like money talks, allowed it. So it was that when Eli Boone took that heavy car down the black face of the mountain that last October night, the fastest boy in all the hills, John Wayne rode shotgun right there beside him. And Lord, but that boy could drive. That was the thing the stranger would remember. He sat there quiet in the dark, and he watched young Eli take that big, overloaded car down switchback after switchback in pure and total blackness, at speeds that would surely have killed most grown men in the broad light of day, the headlights switched clean off, the boy feeling out the road by pure memory and by instinct, easing that Ford through blind curve after blind curve, smooth and certain as creek water finding its way downhill, the engine never one time complaining. Once, coming hard around a tight bend, a logging truck came grinding up the other way with no warning at all, its own lights suddenly filling the whole windshield. And Eli, without so much as a sharp breath, laid that Ford over onto the narrow shoulder above a 200-foot drop and slipped past the truck with maybe 6 inches of daylight to spare and brought it back onto the road, smooth as anything, and never once flinched. And all the while, up there on the dark dashboard, the pocket watch ticked away steady underneath it all, and the tall stranger looked down at that ticking watch and then over at the calm young face of the boy driving, and he understood, right down in his heart, that Eli Boone's real gift had never once been the driving at all. Because here is the thing that Eli feared, and he feared it exactly right. He had figured out, somewhere down deep, that Hollis Trask had never once meant to let him go free. The run itself was the setup. Collect that big cross-state payment, take delivery of the cash, and then be quietly rid of the boy who by now knew far, far too much, out on some dark and lonely road, and close out the whole rotten debt with a shovel and a shallow hole. Somewhere on this very mountain, Eli believed with his whole heart, this run was meant to be the night that he did not come home to his grandmother ever again. And midway down, low and quiet under the sound of the engine, the tall stranger told the boy that he was right. "I know just exactly what they've got planned for you at the end of this road, son," he said, even and calm. "I've known it for days now, and I want you to hear me clear. It is not going to happen. Not tonight, not ever. You are protected. Every last road off of this mountain has got a man standing on it tonight who does not work for Hollis Trask and never will. You just get us on down to that meet, and then you do exactly what I tell you to do, when I tell you, and you are going to walk away from this whole thing tonight a free man. Your grandmother is already safe. Her debt is already paid off, in full, days ago. Hollis Trask just doesn't know yet that he already lost. Eli's hands stayed steady on that wheel, but in the dim green glow of the dash lights, his eyes were wet in the dark. The meet was down in a river bottom, just over the county line, the drop, where Hollis Trask himself and his kingpin partner from up the line and the big out-of-state buyers up from Carolina were all gathered together, better than 30 men in all, with lanterns and trucks, and a locked strongbox fairly bursting with cash money for the single biggest sale of the whole year. Eli brought the Ford down off the mountain and into that bottom slow and easy, and he cut the big engine, and in the sudden ringing quiet, the only sound in all the world was that pocket watch, ticking away steady on the dash. And then the whole world lit up white. The federal agents had been scattered, hidden and undercover, at every single road out of that river bottom for hours upon hours, and Agent Harmon sprang the whole trap all at once, great white floodlights snapping on from the tree line, and shouted orders ringing out across the bottom, and armed federal revenue men coming out of the dark woods on every side at once, with their guns up. 6 long years Harmon had chased this exact moment, and now, here it was, whole and complete, and delivered right into his hands. The kingpin, the interstate buyers, the strongbox full of cash, the loaded liquor, the trucks, and Hollis Trask, his own smiling self. Every last one of them caught together in one clearing, in one single instant, with nowhere on this earth left to run. Trask understood inside of about 2 seconds flat that he was ruined. Everything, the whole patient, evil, lifelong empire of his, gone up in white light in the space of one breath. And a patient man, friends, when he finally does break, breaks all the way to the bottom. His eyes went straight to the boy. He knew, somehow, in his gut, that Eli was the crack that had let it all come apart. And he came for him, and 2 of his hardest men came right along with him, meaning to make the boy pay in blood before ever the handcuffs went on. They never laid a hand on him, because the big stranger, the quiet buyer's man who'd ridden shotgun down the mountain, stepped clean in between Hollis Trask's men and that boy, and he moved faster and surer and harder than any man in that whole clearing had thought a man of his size could ever move. It was over quick, and it was clean, and not one soul died in it. He took the pistol right out of the first man's hand before the fellow even knew it was gone, and put him down flat in the river mud. The second man swung a wild fist at him, and the stranger stepped inside of it easy and dropped the man with one short, hard, certain blow, and left him sitting stunned in the mud, all the fight gone clean out of him. And then Hollis Trask himself, screaming now, every last bit of that soft Sunday smoothness torn away at last, came lunging in at the boy with murder in his face. And the tall stranger simply turned and set his feet and put one clean, honest punch square into the middle of the man, just the one, and Hollis Trask folded up like an empty coat and went straight down into the cold river mud, right as the federal agents reached him and snapped the cuffs onto his wrists. That was all it took. One punch. The most powerful man in all of Cocke County, flat on his back in the mud with the bracelets going on, and the boy he had held in bondage for 2 long years standing over him, whole and unharmed, and, at long last, free. In the white floodlights and the shouting, one of the older federal agents got himself a good clear look at the big buyer's man, who had just cleared 3 armed and violent men off of an 18-year-old boy without hardly breaking a sweat, and the agent's mouth just fell open, because he knew that face. Every man, woman, and child in America knew that face. He started, without thinking, to say the name out loud. But the big man caught his eye across the clearing, and he gave just one small, quiet shake of his head and waved the whole thing off. Easy. And the agent closed his mouth and never said it. By the grey light of dawn, it was all finished and done. Hollis Trask and his kingpin partner from up the line, and the big interstate buyers up from Carolina, and close to 30 of Trask's own men, and the bought and corrupt county sheriff himself, arrested, every single one of them. The operation that had ruled that whole dark end of the Tennessee mountains for a full generation was broken clean apart in one single night. And Eli Boone was alive, and he was free, and he was safe. Here, Now is what came after. Eli was safe, and Ada's debt was already long gone, paid off, in full, days before that last run was ever made, so that the little frame home up the hollow off Wolf Creek was secure and sound, no matter which way that terrible night had broken. That was the one thing above all others that the stranger had seen to before anything else at all. Whatever the risk that night to the boy himself, that blind and gentle old woman was never once going to be put out on the road. And she never was. But the law is still the law, and Eli had made those runs, every one of them, and there was simply no pretending that he had not. He was going to have to answer for them in a court. And here the tall stranger did one more quiet thing for the boy. He funded a good lawyer, a real one, the best in that part of the state, and he made certain that the court heard the whole entire truth of the matter. An orphaned boy, only 16 years old when it all began, coerced and held by a rigged and rotten debt hung over the head of his blind grandmother, driven into all of it by the very same man that the federal government of the United States had just put away for 20 years. When Eli Boone's day in court came, that young lawyer laid the whole of it out before the judge, plain and true and unhurried, and he did not spare a single detail of the trap that Hollis Trask had built. He laid out the ledger rigged to grow. He laid out the day the boy tried to pay and be free, and was shown the numbers, and was reminded, soft and smiling, of his blind grandmother alone up the hollow. He put old Wade Pruitt on the stand, and he put Agent Harmon on the stand, and both of those men told the court, under oath, exactly what manner of thing had been done to that child. And the judge, being, as it happened, a decent and a thoughtful man, sat and weighed a boy coerced by love against a patient predator who had made a whole business of coercion, and he did right by the boy. Hollis Trask and his kingpin partner each drew 15 to 20 years behind the walls. The bought sheriff drew a stiff term of his own, and Eli Boone, the judge, gave the boy a short and light sentence, the most of it suspended, and sent him back up the mountain, home to his grandmother, where he belonged. Before he ever left that county, the tall stranger came one last time to see the boy, out on the low front porch of the little house up the hollow, with old Ada rocking blind and peaceful and content in her chair, close by in the autumn sun. "Your grandmother is safe now, son," the stranger said, quiet. "This home is yours, free and clear, every board of it, and there is not a man alive who is ever going to take it away from her, or from you." He stood there a while and looked out over the folded blue ridges of those mountains. "You kept a roof over that woman's head for 2 whole years with nothing in this world but your own 2 hands and your own steady nerve. You understand me, son? Whatever it is that they made you do out there on those dark roads, that is not who you are. That was never who you are. Your gift was never once the driving. Why, any fool who lives long enough can learn to drive a car. No. Your gift is that you would have driven down the face of that mountain every single night of your life, for as long as you drew breath, just to keep that old woman safe and warm. That right there is loyalty. And loyalty, son, is about the rarest and finest thing there is left in this whole world." He put his hat on then to go. "You're free now, Eli. So here is what I want from you, and it's the only thing that I will ever ask of you, so long as I live. Someday, somewhere, there is going to be another kid just like you were, trapped in the dark, dead sure that nobody's ever coming for him. And when that day comes, boy, you be the one who comes from the outside. You pass it on down the line." Eli asked the man his name. The tall stranger only smiled and shook his head slow. "Now don't you go making a big story out of me," he said, gentle. "You tell folks the law did this thing, the federal men and the good, decent people around here who were finally brave enough to stand up and help. That is who saved you, son, not me." And with that he got into his long, dusty automobile, and he drove on down off the mountain, and he was gone from that country before the boy ever learned who in the world he had been. Agent Harmon had known who the man was from the very first afternoon he'd walked into his office, and Harmon kept it to himself, close, for the whole rest of his long career, exactly the way he had been quietly asked to. But many years later, an old and retired man himself now, Harmon finally told the story, and this is the way that he told it. "I chased Hollis Trask for 6 solid years," the old agent said, "and I never once so much as laid a glove on the man. And then, one ordinary afternoon, John Wayne walked into my office, and he handed me Hollis Trask on a silver plate. He funded half of the whole operation right out of his own pocket. He rode shotgun himself on the last run, down a mountain, in the dark. He
He stepped his own body in between that boy and 3 armed men. And then he asked me, quiet, that his name should never once appear anywhere in any of it. And it never did. Not in a single one of my reports, not in the newspapers, not anywhere on this earth. Not until right now.
And Cocke County itself changed. With Hollis Trask gone away behind the walls and the bought sheriff gone with him, honest law at long last came up into those mountains, and the long, dark bondage of the moonshine trade, the rigged debts, the trapped boys, the whole families held down by fear, began, finally, to break apart and fall away. Eli Boone lived out all her last years safe and warm and content in her very own home, up her very own hollow, and Eli cared for her tender to the very end of her days, and she never one single time stopped telling that boy that she had surely told him so. Somebody good always comes. They always do come, child, if you can just hold on till they get here. And Eli Boone kept the promise that he made on that porch. He grew up into a man, and he put on a different kind of uniform than the one his father had worn. He became a Tennessee State Highway patrolman. He spent his whole long career out on those same dark mountain roads he had once run in fear. Only now he rode them on the right side of the law, and he made it the entire work of his life to hunt down the men who preyed upon desperate, fatherless mountain children, the Hollis Trasks of the next hard generation, and to break their traps wide open before they ever had the chance to close. He became, for one trapped and hopeless kid after another, exactly what the tall stranger had once been for him. The one who comes in from the outside. In his later years, he started up a program for young drivers in the county, and he mentored a whole string of young troopers coming up behind him. And there was one boy in particular, a fatherless boy, headed fast for real trouble, that Eli Boone pulled up short and set straight, and that boy grew up to wear the very same badge himself. The chain that the tall stranger had cut on that mountain back in 1958 turned, over the long, slow years, into a different kind of chain entirely. One good man reaching back into the dark for the next one, and that one reaching back for the next, on and on and on, down through all the years. Eli Boone lived himself a long life, and a good and honest one, and it was only near the very end of it that the last piece of this whole story finally came into the light. When at last they went through the old man's things, after Ada had been many long years in her grave, and Eli himself grown old and grey, they found a plain box, tucked away and near forgotten, that had been put by for decades. And inside of that old box were 2 things, and 2 things only. The first was Cade Boone's silver pocket watch, the very same watch that had sat and ticked away steady on the dashboard through every single run, through the last run itself, keeping its patient time all through the dark. And laid there, right beside it, was a letter, written out in a square, plain, unhurried hand, that the tall stranger had left behind him all those long years before. The letter was a short one, and this is what it said. Son, you were never once a criminal. You were a boy trapped by love, and there is no finer nor more terrible reason in all this world to be trapped by anything. I want you to get this straight, and I want you to keep it straight for the whole rest of your life. I did not save you. The law saved you, and the good people who were finally brave enough to help them do it. And you saved your grandmother. You did that. Nobody else on this earth but you. Now you go on and be the one who comes in from the outside for the next one, because there is always, always a next one. You are free now. Go and make it mean something. And it was signed, in that same square and patient hand, a fellow who was glad to ride shotgun. Many years on, someone thought to match that square handwriting against a private collection of letters kept out in California, and it was a perfect match. The letters belonged to a man whose birth certificate read, in full, Marion Robert Morrison, the plain name from before the whole wide world ever came to know him by another one. The tall stranger, who had ridden shotgun on the fastest boy in the hills' very last run, had been John Wayne. Eli had suspected it, if he was honest, for the better part of his whole life. Old Agent Harmon's story had a way of drifting back to him over the long years. But Eli Boone never one single time traded on it. He never told it to sell a thing, nor to make himself out to be important, nor to put himself at the center of a story that he always said belonged to the law and to his grandmother and to the good people of that county. He kept it close and quiet,
exactly the way that it had been given to him.
Near the very end of his life, Eli donated the watch and the letter both to a Tennessee Heritage Museum, where the two of them sit together to this day, side by side in a glass case. The small placard fixed beneath them tells the whole of the story out plain. The rigged debt, the blind grandmother, the bought sheriff, the federal men, the last run down the dark mountain, and the trap that closed at last in the river bottom. It names Eli Boone, and it names Ada Boone, but it does not name the tall stranger anywhere on it, because that had been the one thing the man ever asked. It says only this, that a man came in from the outside and broke the trap and declined to give his name. And down at the very bottom of that placard, carved there in Eli Boone's own words, at his own request, is this one line: "The world is full of people trapped by their own good hearts. Be the one who comes from outside." So that is the story. An orphan boy of just 18, held fast in the dark by a debt that was never once meant to be paid, made to run a mountain night after night for the sake of the blind grandmother that he loved more than his own life. A patient, smiling, church-going man who truly believed that a person's love could be used as a cage on them forever. And a tall stranger who came up a lonesome mountain road one October evening, looking for nothing more than gasoline and a hot meal, saw the fear in a boy's face and simply could not make himself drive on by. A man who cut the chain and closed the trap and rode shotgun on the last run down a black mountain, and then asked for nothing at all in return, except that the boy should someday go and do the very same thing for somebody else. They don't make men like John Wayne anymore. If this story rode along with you tonight, do me that one small favor. Type "ride along" down there in the comments, and share this one with anybody you know who's trapped tonight by their own good heart. And subscribe and stay right here with us, because there is a brand new story here every single night at the stroke of midnight, from a time when a man's true worth was measured slowly and honestly and right.